Given the failed attempt that I had at playing No Retreat, I played it again with my wife. Playing with the rules correctly this time. And it ended on turn 6, sudden death victory for the Germans. She was able to put a fairly dogged defense in place. I probably saw some conditions where maybe she could have done a little better. I didn't get terribly great cards, but I'll say this much: it's a tough road for the Russians. I think no matter what, I would not be shocked, at least among inexperienced players, if the Russians lose due to sudden death victory on a very regular basis. And here's the problem. For me, I'm not someone who wants to study a game enough to figure out how to make them survive. So kind of my answer here is, I don't really feel like playing it again in Solitaire. I've played now 4 games of this in the course of a year. That's a lot for me. I understand that for the kind of player who's really into this kind of game, that's nothing. You know, they want to play it every weekend or something and figure the puzzle out. And I understand that view. If I didn't have many games, I might swing more to that. I might end up, I'm not sure, you know, my wife's feelings on it, but she doesn't seem compelled to play more games of it. One of the other problems with it is very, very much, for me, not the kind of game I want to play Solitaire much. I find it very, very interesting playing Opposed. I think it's a cool game, Opposed. But playing something like this, Solitaire, it just doesn't capture the same kind of feeling that playing something that tells more story. This is almost like playing chess Solitaire. Not in the sense that you know what's going to happen or whatever. Those random cards do a lot to shake up, you know, so this isn't just a pure strategy game, but there's a lot to it. You know, when I sit down and play something like this, I feel like I'm really taxed. I have to be thinking about every move, every counter move, and certainly sometimes I'm in the mood for that kind of thing, but almost never when I play Solitaire. So I'm glad I have it as an occasional thing to pull out for an Opposed game. The one negative I did bring up in my other video is if you sit down to play the campaign, you definitely have this, okay, great, it was over in 6 turns or 10 turns or whatever. I played a game that was significantly less time than I expected, and it's going to take me a long time to get over that. And then when I hit that hump, let's say I'm expecting the short games to try to learn and understand how to play the campaign better, and then it stretches out, that may be painful. I feel like there's going to be a lot of points in the game where new things are coming to mind, not because of some, well, to some extent because of the deck change and the random events and stuff like that that happens, but more just a matter of, it feels like the whole tenor of the game swings when the offensive change is there in a way that I think may cause the Germans to fail in the same way that the Russians are failing, and where sudden death might come about for an earlier Russian victory, and then just this sort of unsatisfied in each single game. Now, like I said in the earlier video, something like La Révolution Française, I would walk away from every game feeling a little unsatisfied and wanting another, and I feel that with this. I really do feel this desire to play another one, but frankly, I doubt that I want to expend that much of my gaming time on one game. If I did, this would be an interesting one to study, no question there. There were some questions that came up from viewers that I kind of wanted to look at. One in particular was the counter blows. In general, I like the mechanism. I like the idea of I'm coming out of my kind of defensive structure, forcing you into a position where you have to attack me. I think that represents a lot of neat stuff. This is a game that has a lot of things like that, the card play, a lot of the different things that seem representative of reasonable things. The one place where that kind of bothers me is the Siege of Leningrad, or a Stalingrad siege or something. Somewhat less, because the Russians certainly poured in an attack there. But at Leningrad, it doesn't feel to me like the fortress there, as it were, came out and attacked. Like there was, maybe I'm mistaken, don't understand the history well, but it's fairly easy, I think, to eliminate that fortress even at an early stage in the game. And that's worth 2 victory points pretty quickly that are almost impossible to take away once they fall, as well as one of the objective hexes. So I almost always kind of look to Leningrad. I want that. And there has not been a game yet where I haven't taken Leningrad. Granted, I haven't played that many, but I've played 4. And it's pretty hard to stop. This time I had to use a counter blow to do it. It seems a little too potent there. So I suspect, and I'm not shocked by this at all for a game at this kind of high level with a very competitive bent towards it, not a lot of special cases, although it has a decent number of them, that this is a game where you get, in general, maybe not terribly historical results, or that there's things that the players may want to do. Now, maybe there's a reason you don't want to go hard on Leningrad. I think it's a good thing to do, and I think it will fall if the Germans demand it. It doesn't take a whole lot, like 3 pieces, I think, can pretty much guarantee taking it. And chances are you got a card that can help you. Like, there's a card that reduces it from a fortress back to a regular unit. There's other cards that can definitely help kind of loosen that up for you. Of course, you're fighting for 2 points there. There are other areas on the board that are worth more, but they're harder to defend and harder to just kind of ignore. It takes 1 piece over in Finland to secure that point. That has to stay there all game. And then maybe 1 other piece to secure your flank around the Moscow front. The one thing that was kind of cool was actually playing by the rules, and I remember doing this the first time I played, actually. You have to kind of work very hard on that pocketing situation. Over leaving the enemy behind you. That's very familiar ground for World War II Eastern Front. In fact, it feels almost as extreme in the pocketing as something like Hitler's War does, where you're really kind of fighting each other to see who can drop the bigger pocket on the other guy. And you get this swing back and forth. Oh, now you're out of supply, dude. And because so here's the thing, the units that are pocketed in this, though, can fight their way out of the pocket. That's a somewhat different thing. So it's less likely that the Russians are going to throw a pocket on the Germans early in the game. Anyway, I think there's a lot to look at and play with this, and if I was the kind of person who wanted still to go down and just study one game, this would be a very interesting choice, but I still cannot speak to it as to, you know, how historical it is. It has a lot of little twists in it that add to the enjoyment, but I do have the suspicion, when you look at the counterblow at Leningrad as an example, I don't know if I have any others, that maybe the history, and there's just this bias against something this kind of light and competitive, that there's a good chance that you're going to get into these very ahistorical kind of gamey type situations. But they may be very specific, where they just seem unlikely at that point. The other side of it is, of course, I can't speak, you know, as I said, to the competitive player as to, hey, is this a balanced game? Again, the overall gaming community seems to be giving it a couple big thumbs up on that. But I don't know how much of that is based on the original game and how much of that is based on this newer expanded version with 2 expansions built into it. It could be that actually the original Victory Point game was more balanced, and when you start adding this this sudden death, it may actually slant in favor of the Germans because of that early edge. I'm not sure. The designer came back to say that the kind of early assault was basically impossible. Well, I'll agree that the turn 3-1 looked completely impossible to me. In fact, I didn't think it was possible when I played it solo. Even playing the rules wrong, I was shocked with how it happened. But turn 6 looks very, very likely from my stance, and in every game it's been sort of the German stance. That the Russians really have to fight hard to avoid that turn 6 layer where they only need to, it's only 23 cities, 23 victory points, which means 11 cities or surrendered units. And surrendered units still aren't that hard to get. I actually managed to cause more units to surrender once I started focusing on pocketing instead of simply destruction. I didn't get as much gain on the board, but, I mean, obviously I didn't win on turn 3. But it was, you know, when you really start focusing on pocketing, you make key attacks and maneuvers to try to cut the other person off. Some of that, though, is probably my wife being too aggressive with the Soviets and being too forward with them. The problem is, if you're not forward, if you don't hold the line, if you start giving up cities, you're risking the sudden death for that too. But I think there's probably some mid-ground, some place where you can say, and after a few more plays, maybe I would find that, yeah, this is where the Russians have to defend. This is their line. I don't feel that in other East Front games. What I usually feel is, here's the terrain that's close, that I'm giving up the least ground for, that's where I want to defend, and, you know, let the vagaries of the advance kind of determine where I look for good terrain. So, you know, I certainly prefer a game with more detail and a more richness and a lot less thinking. I was thinking about this on, I've said this other times too, I was thinking about this on my walk shopping today, which was, you know, that's a game that just takes too much thought. I know some people would rather, the modern goal, ideal, is very few actions and decisions, as few as possible, but each one as important as possible. Well, for me, it's kind of the opposite. I don't mind some big, broad decision, and I went into this in the other video, but I don't really want a game where I'm agonizing over every little move. I don't mind making some big choice in the game as to which direction to head in. Am I gonna go for the Caucasus? Am I gonna go for Moscow? And then implementing that is a bunch of little, almost mechanical decisions, very simple little decisions that I'm used to, that it's just a matter of knowing how to use the units properly. That's not this game at all. This game becomes one where every single piece placement is just so vital. You have so few pieces that building a line usually requires every piece you have. So like when I do my pocketing, well, there's some units that kind of have to contain the pocket to prevent it from doing damage maybe. But many of my units are trying to stretch a permanent line from, you know, the northern board front edge to the southern board edge of my territory, and say, you're behind that, you're not getting out easily. And when you mix that with the ability to play cards to do stuff, the ability to use rail movement to reposition your forces, to block off supplies, etc., it just all becomes very much an optimization type problem, very much a puzzle type game to me. Now, Normally that's the death knell for a game, in my view. But this one still keeps... there's something in me that wants to go back and play it some more, even so. So there's some kind of magic in here that I'm not used to. I know this is probably totally unhelpful to anyone interested in the game, but there are some people interested more in my view of the game than the game itself. And that's, I guess, what this kind of closure is. It's possible I'll come back to it at some other point, but there are other games I want to come back to too. You know, I want to come back to White Mountain and see if I can launch the attack up the hill on that. That's unlikely to. I'm doing Dune all at once instead of playing the base game and then playing with the expansions. Because, hey, I want to showcase what I can in what limited amount of playing time that I have. Alright, up it goes.